Hello, everyone, and welcome to Some Like It Classic. I'm your host, Tami Goveia. And today I want to share that this is a very special moment because we're actually creating a new segment for the show. It's called Keeping It Classic, and it's basically a couple of classic film fans getting together, picking movies, watching the movies, and then, as classic film fans are wont to do, talking about the movies over a glass of champagne. So today we are keeping it classic with Annika Noelle. Ta-da!
Did you memorize that? That was amazing. I'm like, where's your teleprompter? That was so good.
That'll be in the budget for next year. That's what we're working on.
It was beautifully, so eloquent.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited. Yeah, I was thinking about how this even came to pass, and you were actually doing a live.
I was.
And you were kind of just thinking off the top of your head of, there's other stuff I want to do on the side, and, here's what I love to do. And you mentioned the love of classic films, and I had no idea.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I know like Julie London's one of your singing musical icons. Mm-hmm. So I knew you had an old soul.
And I am a bit of a history buff, and it's funny because it wasn't my favorite subject in school. But I think honestly, like I took AP US History, AP Euro, and those courses have actually come to serve me the most in my life now and having that kind of literacy. And I also went to UCLA's School of Theater, Film, and Television and actually brought a book that I had to study back in the day.
It's in good shape.
Thank you. And still with some original tabs from when I was doing research and thesis papers. But yeah, I obviously took a lot of American film, a lot of American cinema classes. I created a course for myself in high school about French film, New Wave, all that. Yeah,
that's a whole show. Let's do that.
I'm a nerd. I am a history nerd. And so I think it will be really fun to delve into a lot of I think it's important to know the context of what was happening at the time to kind of understand how much these films really made an impact and what it was responding to in the culture and what was going on. So yeah, I'm excited to get into this because both of our choices, I think, are very in tune to one another and two very different times as well. Yeah.
So let's make a toast as can we?
Yes.
We'll do the clink. We're doing it. Ah! Cheers, my love. To keeping it classic.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, this is delish.
Okay.
I asked you. Okay, so when I was thinking about this, I was actually wondering, what are we going to do? Should we pick one movie, and then talk about it? Should we talk about an era, like our favorite era, which is tons of fun to talk about? And then I thought, I think it would be fun to just let you pick something, which is hard because it's not like you only have one favorite film, right?
It was very easy for me.
Was it really easy?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's interesting because it wasn't easy for me.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's a mood thing.
For me, it's like everybody needs to see this film. Like everyone has to see this film.
And your film that you chose is?
Gilda,
1946. Rita Hayworth, Glenn Ford, and Charles Vidor as the director.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was looking him up. The Swan, Hans Christian Andersen, Love Me or Leave Me with Doris Day and James Cagney. I mean, his resume is something else. When you said Gilda, I thought, oh, fun, seen it, it's been a minute, so definitely need to rewatch. Why Gilda?
So You don't necessarily watch Gilda for plot. I think that's pretty clear. They say that when you look at the trivia for the film, that they were getting pages on the day and there were rewrites and things happening. So the whole tungsten of it all is a little, you don't need it. You watch for Rita Hayworth. you watch for Rita Hayworth and Glenn Ford. And I think for me, when I first saw this actually in my class for American film, what really struck me was the strength and tenacity of her character and how she was so like allowed to be so brazen and sexual and a vixen and the comebacks, which we'll talk about with Babyface, which again, I'm so happy that we talked about this, but it was not some, people I think have this image of the classic Hollywood cinema and what American life was then. And if you look at the leading women of that era, they weren't shrinking violets.
No, they weren't.
You have the Greta Garbos, Katharine Hepburns, Mae West, Rita Hayworth. I could go on. Betty and Joan, obviously.
Olivia.
Yeah.
But those women in particular had to fight.
Mm-hmm.
Had to fight Hollywood and the system.
Yes.
In order to
one of my most prized possessions is actually a old magazine that Marilyn Monroe wrote a piece for about, I think it was called Wolves at the Door. And it talks about having to be a woman in the industry and what it's like to kind of have to navigate those waters. But what is very interesting about these two films is that, especially Babyface, was at a time when, and it's actually a sad statistic, and I took notes. I don't want to be misquoting. I don't want to, I wanted to get it right. But basically, I want to get my, here we go. More women were employed in the U.S. in filmmaking during this time in cinema, especially the silent era of cinema.
Absolutely.
Than any other time.
Absolutely.
Writers, directors, producers. And that is something that has been kind of, I don't want to say erased, but it is something that has been forgotten.
Well, they blame it on World War II.
Yeah.
They blame it on a myriad of, myriad reasons. The fact of the matter, to your point, is women were almost completely eliminated, especially when you look behind the scenes. There were some female costume designers, obviously, but the rest of the crew were all men.
There were still some, but I want to give, can I throw stats out?
Please.
Okay. I also have amazing quotes from the women who were in those positions of power in the industry. So, January 6, 2023, AFI released this new study that they called Groundbreaking about the contributions of women in early cinema. It's called Women They Talk About. And from 1910 to 1930, women were credited as co-writers in 27.5% of film productions. 19.6% of features were based on source material written by women. Films directed by women during this time period, 31% were more likely to have female writers. And they also have released this another study called Behind the Veil, which is where they have cataloged all of these lost silent films, over 6,000 shorts that feature the representation of women, whether directing, whether being the cinematographer. Like, it is fascinating. And for me, and we can talk about this as well, this era of Hollywood before, the war was over, when they were trying to get the women back in the kitchen, which, is kind of echoing some current things happening.
Cyclical.
Yes. This for me is the women were written with such nuance, with such depth, with such complexity. They were anti-heroes. They weren't just kind of these pretty little creatures. They had faults. They were messy. They had so many vulnerabilities. And for me, it was this really rich era where it was in part thanks to a lot of female writing teams, which both of these films had a female on the writing team. And as well, we could get into Gilda with the backstory, which I find is so fascinating. So Gilda was, and interrupt me, I do, because I'm a nerd for this stuff. Gilda was Columbia Pictures, which we all know was, where is his, Harry Cohn was the head of it. And what I think people glance over, don't really understand, is that it was produced by Virginia Van Up. So Harry, and I have to give him props for doing this, even though he has a reputation, he was of being a bit of a taskmaster. Like he was very difficult to work with.
Yep.
Yeah. But he put Virginia Van Up as executive producer of Columbia Pictures in 1945, and a woman wouldn't hold this post again for 31 years. Also look up Harriet Parsons.
Do you know what her tenure was?
Harrison.
How long she held the position?
You know, I didn't, but she was very successful.
Yeah,
I mean, Gilda was her first kind of foray into this as an executive producer. She, oh gosh, what was it? There was another one that she had just turned around where like the film was struggling, and then she came on board and she was able to salvage it. So what was interesting, and this is where I get you'll find me on the IMDb movie trivia and doing my research because I find this stuff so fascinating. This was written as a vehicle for Rita Hayworth. Like it really was. And Harry Cohn, you know, the head of Columbia Pictures, kind of felt like she was his personal, like he discovered her. He felt kind of some ownership over her. And what people don't always realize is that Rita Hayworth was a young Latina actress. Her name was Margarita Carmen Cancino. She had to dye her hair, went through years of painful electrolysis to change her hairline. And she became very close with the executive producer of Columbia Pictures, Virginia, because Virginia kind of became this confidant for who she could confide in and dealing with Harry and his possessiveness and like how controlling he was. And also at the time she was going through a very public, I think they were breaking up with Orson Welles at the time.
Talk about complex.
Yes. And so it was this piece that essentially was created for her as a star vehicle, which we don't see anymore. I wish we did see more people taking risks on unknowns or people who haven't necessarily gotten the foothold just yet, like believing in that. But Virginia saw that Gilda's story shadowed a lot of what Rita Hayworth was going through in her personal life. She was trapped by the jealousy and possessiveness of men.
Controlling situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so in a way, also the most iconic, which we've seen in movies since, Put the Blame on Mame, is one of the most iconic scenes in cinema history. I believe Shawshank is a big, it's a big scene for that, as well as the, Gilda, are you decent? Who, me? With the hair toss. It is what I think of when I think of just Hollywood, classic Hollywood greatness. And what I didn't realize until I started doing my research for this podcast was that scene of Put the Blame on Mame was a way for them to kind of give them a little bit of a kickback to those powers that kind of suppress and subjugate women. And it was Gilda's rebellion against these men trying to control and trying to be possessive of her. And I just thought that was such a beautiful thing with Put the Blame on Mame. I have here that it was a defiant rebuttal to Hollywood's insistence that it's always the woman's fault, that a beautiful woman is always to blame.
Well, here's two. I will tell you, there were a few moments that really bothered me. One is, toward the end where, Johnny, they're married, and Johnny just refuses to let her go. And so he just tracks her wherever she goes and just tries, stops her with whoever she's trying to go out with, because she's trying to give it to him and he's giving it back to her. And then there's that scene where she literally grovels at his feet. I can't take this anymore. Just let me go, please. And as you were saying, there was that moment where if a woman takes ownership of her sexuality, if she wields that power, she will be punished. She will either die, get killed, or there's this sense of the only way I can get out of this situation is if I leave who I am literally on the floor, because I'm not in control. And there's Johnny looking down at her as she's groveling at his feet. And I understood it, and I understood where Gilda was coming from, because she didn't have any choices at this point. She didn't.
So you can't get an annulment.
Right.
Yeah. In I believe it's Argentina, you have to have your husband sign off on the divorce.
Yes. Sign of the times, signs of the culture, what was going on then. And
in the movie and both in the cinema, the World War II had just ended, for context. And I can't wait to get into pre-code.
Yes.
Depression era, what was happening during the time when the men were away at war. We'll get into that. Yeah. Don't want to jump ahead.
But the other thing too that really bothered me was, the actor who played the police detective was fantastic. I didn't write his name down, but he's really a lovely character throughout the entire film up until the end. And he tells Johnny, by the way, Gilda didn't do any of those things that you're holding against her. And Johnny's trying to keep his pride together. And the only reason he goes back to Gilda, and I don't even know if he ever says, I'm sorry, is because, she didn't have sex with these other men. To me was, she's still pure, even though Gilda's not pure at all, clearly. But in his mind, there's that pedestal that, she's still on that pedestal of his. And so that really bothered me. And then when he did try to apologize, I did love the line. She interrupts him and she says, Johnny, she said, I haven't used this word in so long. We were both stinkers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I loved that. I have to use that word more often. You're a stinker. You're just a stinker.
And this gets into the Hollywood code, right? Of here we go. This is why I take notes. This is why I take notes.
We're talking about the production code.
The production codes, the Haze code, William Haze. So we're kind of working backwards, which is fun, and I like this. So basically, during the Great Depression, there was, and we'll get to this when we talk about babyface in the pre-code era, there was so much more kind of violence, more sexuality, and a real unflinching look at what people would do to get by during that time.
Right. More unapologetic.
Exactly. Then I'm going to quote my lovely movie Made America here by Robert Sklar. But I have this here. So there was a Legion of Decency campaign that happened that mobilized a lot of support because they felt like what was being seen on film and now, that it was in opposition to the traditional middle-class morality. So, then they created or actually started becoming more stringent with the code. And this is actually a reason why during this era that we see a change in the depiction of morality on camera. So this is on page 174 of Movie Made America. Let's see. Okay. So the code at least faced up to a fact which previous moral regulators had cloaked in ambiguity. Without sex and crime pictures, there wouldn't be enough patrons to sustain a movie business. Granting this, they sought to devise a formula that would keep sex and crime pictures within moral bounds. Their solution allowed for a fairly wide leeway in depicting behavior considered immoral by traditional standards. Adultery or murder, for example, so long as some element of good in the story balanced what the code defined as evil. This was the formula of compensating moral value. So if bad acts are committed, they must be counteracted by punishment and retribution, or reform and regeneration of the sinful one. Quote, evil and good are never to be confused throughout the presentation, the code said. The guilty must be punished, and the audience must not be allowed to sympathize with crime or sin.
And that was one of the beautiful things about the mobster films early on, because America had never seen, first of all, that side, the underbelly of society, mobsters, gangs, gangsters.
But also prohibition and mobsters in that era, that was a huge
reflection of the times.
Yeah.
But you sympathized. Mm-hmm. You sympathized with James Cagney and Edward G. Robinson. You sympathized with them. And here's this, and that's just, that just gets me going. Like, who decides this moral code that somehow needs to be imposed on the masses, because clearly they can't make up their own minds. They can't make up their own personal moral code. So Hollywood needs to do that for them.
Mm-hmm. And obviously we all know a big influence, it's the church, and it is men who are kind of creating.
We can say the word patriarchy.
Can we swear? Can we say? But yeah, so that was kind of, and what is so interesting and why I think this is actually a really fun segue of how we're talking about Gilda first, for kind of what was the product of the production code and the moral implications, and then we'll get into Babyface and the unedited version, the uncensored, with those 4 minutes that were cut from the film versus what was the original one submitted before that. Can I say a couple quotes?
Of course. I think
is so interesting.
Please.
It was actually 1914. These are the quotes. One from 1914, one from 1920. Ida Mae Park, Alice Guy Blaché. I hope I'm saying that right. This was featured in a Woman's Place in Photoplay production in Moving Picture World. And there's another quote here from Careers for Women. So this was really looked at, our industry was looked at as somewhere where women could excel and as somewhere where women's voices were wanted. And this is a quote from Ida Mae Park from 1920, Careers for Women. As for the natural equipment of women for the role of director, the superiority of their emotional and imaginative faculties gives them a great advantage. And then you have in 1914, Alice Guy saying, there is nothing connected with the staging of a motion picture that a woman cannot do as easily as a man, and there is no reason why she cannot completely master every technicality of the art. All of the arts is probably none in which women can make such a splendid use of talent, so much more natural to a woman than that to a man, and so necessary to its perfection. And I just feel like both of these films is such a beautiful reflection of women having a large part in crafting these main female characters with nuance, with strength. Obviously, Gilda, very fallible, very, checkered past, if you will, and then the moral code added of, well, but she actually was good in the end, and therefore she can get the guy. Then
Right.
she can. But I still feel like it was a vehicle for Rita Hayworth and her star power, as well as something for her to kind of take the power back by playing this character who is trapped and who is a kind of a victim of that possession and I think she played it so beautifully. So for me, I really wanted you, and I think everyone needs to watch it, because I remember watching this in class and just going, and not only just this, obviously the Mae West films, Joan Crawford, so many films where you're just sitting there and you're like, oh, the woman's talking back.
Mm-hmm.
The woman,
she's being nasty.
She's being
yeah.
mean.
Yes.
And she's still the lead.
Yes.
And it was such a wild thing, especially growing up in the Disney generation, right? Where we're watching Sleeping Beauty and all this kind of stuff where they talk about, well, if something bad happens, then there has to be something to balance it out in the end, right? Because karma and life.
Right.
And
consequences.
Yes. You know, always. And then watching these beautifully, just not perfect women getting to be the lead, driving story that was so complex and well written and just, again, nuanced. Show, don't tell. I can't wait to talk about Babyface. The acting, that just what she can do in a look. My God. But just the ability to meet a man where he's at and not have it be some messaging of, no, you have to make yourself smaller and you can't, it was, and one of my favorite lines from Gilda, by the way, is when Johnny Farrell goes, doesn't it bother you at all that you're married? And Gilda says, what I want to know is, does it bother you? And it's just, there's so many, once you delve into this era of Hollywood where you're going, oh my gosh, these women were so complex and there was so much strength and I do miss that. I think we're getting back a little bit, but now there's a new wave of trying to kind of push women back under the boot yet again. But
there's a lot more women in Hollywood now behind the camera.
Yes.
So, hope does live on the horizon.
There is
eternal hope.
Gina Davis, obviously.
Of course, yes.
So the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media, she does amazing things with this kind of research. I will say when she was looking at in Cannes, the top female character, if there was a female character, the percentage, I think it was in 2006, there was only 34% had a female leading character. But at least in 2023, there was 44. So, we're making strides.
I remember I saw her, I was working at Sony at the time, and she came to give a talk about, her institute. And she talked about when they did Thelma and Louise. And everyone, and it was a smash success, everyone thought things are finally going to change. It's proof. Women can carry a film. It can be financially successful, critically successful. She said, and nothing changed.
Mm-hmm. Well, Barbie now.
Yeah.
We've seen
Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
So I really believe, and this is, definitely one of the messages for Gilda and one of the messages for Babyface, that you have to know who you are. You have to know who you are at your core. Not perfect, not always pretty. Don't always say the right things. Don't always apologize. Women apologizing repeatedly is one of my pet peeves.
No. Really?
Yeah.
I don't know what that's.
I have no idea.
Can't relate.
No, not at all.
That coming up.
So when it comes to this, the percentages have gotten better in Hollywood. At the end of the day, this is a marathon, not a sprint. As with any cause, as with any change that's going to stick and end up in the history books, that's a whole other thing, what ends up in the history books. History is written by the winners for the most part.
I've been seeing this quote floating around given the current state of the world. Very happy to be here in my little bubble talking about things I love and not looking at the news.
It is replenishing, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I will say I've seen this quote floating around and I think it's very apropos. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Those who prevent history from being taught are planning to repeat it. And I thought that was a very interesting thing, how this whole era, only until 2023 did this study come out by AFI, like a whole era that they've really tried to brush women's contributions of how we were right there building this industry. And we're really viewed and respected as integral parts to it of needing to have the woman's perspective and the woman's voice. Suddenly became very much, you don't hear so much about Mary Pickford. You don't hear so much about Marilyn Monroe creating her own production company and trying to produce the vehicles for which she wanted to be, and not just, an objectified kind of sexual, which she talks about again. Like, she was an incredibly intelligent woman.
Absolutely.
And she's unfortunately been reduced to sometimes only the surface when there was so much more depth and beauty to her than just what was on the outside. She was they said you could always find her in a book. She was very intelligent.
There's so many photos of her just on the couch with a blanket and a book.
Yeah.
It's lovely because you know what that feels like, right? It's just that,
So shout out to Gilda, let's see, for the writers.
Yes.
P.A. Ellington, Joe Essinger, and Marion Parsonette.
Now, I want to say Marion's a man. Because when I looked it up, all they showed were pictures of a man. No. And when it comes to who they were married to a woman.
Is it Marion I'm thinking of? Because there was a female.
There's Joe's a man, J-O. I thought, oh man, that's a woman. But I want to say Marion is a man. We'll take a deeper dive into that.
Because I looked up, I'm either thinking of Babyface or Gilda, because I did the same thing.
Right.
Where I assumed and then saw, but then one of them was a woman. But I know the beautiful thing about Gilda is that Virginia Van Up had a huge part to play.
Yes. Well, clearly there was some female influence in that film.
Don't put the blame on Mame.
Yes.
Mame was a way for them to get around the censors of, the code at that time. And I have to give credit to Chris Robey. He has a beautiful piece that he wrote called The Rise and Fall of Female Silent Filmmakers. And I want to quote him here. He said, "The sexism of contemporary Hollywood filmmaking is projected onto the past." And I think so many times they try to reframe it or to view it from a certain kind of lens when women really were at the helm of this industry in the beginning. At its foundation, there were so many, especially playwrights. There were so many, or screenwriters, I should say. So many writers. And I think it really contributed. And again, why I love Gilda, why I love Babyface, the smart dialogue, the quips, the comebacks, the wit and the intelligence. Well, even though they might not have come from those backgrounds, still their ability to kind of keep up, I loved and so admired.
It was just, toe to toe. Mm-hmm. It was a beautiful dance.
It's a spar.
Beautiful. Absolutely. And I always say this, pacing's everything. Pacing's everything. And I do want to give a shout out to the cinematographer, Rudolph Maté, because the noir aspects of the film, it doesn't take much for Rita to look gorgeous, right?
I want to be shot in
black and white. Could I just go in and out of shadows the rest of my life and just, it's absolutely amazing. And then we have it's more Jean-Louis, who's the costume designer. She designed the infamous black dress that Gilda wore. And she just never missed a beat in that.
I'm blanking on, the man that she's married to.
The actor's name is George McCready.
And he character is
Balin Mutson.
Balin.
Yes.
That shot of Balin in the shadows.
Literally.
Johnny in
literally
the light.
half. Yes.
Yeah, it's just the cinematography. And there's a shot it's funny that you have your shot you wanted to talk about with Gilda, because I have a shot for Babyface that I was like,
oh, there's so many, but yes.
It's so good. And I think that's just the thing that I sometimes yearn for, and why there's a nostalgia and why I keep going back to this era of Hollywood film. It's just good storytelling.
It is.
It's good writing. It's showing, not telling. And again, especially once we get into Technicolor. Oh, it's so pretty.
Yes.
It is just, they hand paint every frame, some of these.
Recently did a show on the movie Picnic and talk about Technicolor. It was so gorgeous. So gorgeous.
I haven't watched that one. I'm going to have to.
Oh, yes.
But Singing in the Rain, I think,
it's
for many
my favorite.
people. Yeah.
It's my favorite. There was one thing that you said, it's totally flew out of my brain. About Gilda. No, we can keep going.
Oh, no, I was going to get my phone because I wanted to look up the writer thing to make sure that I had it.
Oh.
I was like.
No, that's. Okay. Yeah.
Edit this part out.
I like it live. I like it stream of consciousness kind of thing. Gilda didn't win any awards, wasn't even nominated, even though it was a very successful film. That's what I wanted to say. So George McCready, who played Balin, he's from Rhode Island.
Aww.
He played like such a good Austrian. Was he German? He was Austrian in the film. No?
I don't know, but he did have an accent.
He had a heavy accent, and he played a lot of villains because he just had that look.
The look.
I started laughing out loud. He's from Rhode Island. That's hysterical.
We can do accents too.
I know.
It's not just the Brits.
I know.
And the Australians.
It works.
We're also capable.
So let's get into Babyface.
I am so happy. Okay, so basically, again, I'm jumping around, and this is my brain. We texted each other. I knew I was coming on the podcast. I was kind of like, well, what are we going to be discussing? What's the context? And you said, I'll pick a film and you pick a film. I'm like, great, Gilda. You're like, great, Babyface. And you sent me a GIF.
Yes.
GIF.
Isn't it fabulous?
Of Barbara Stanwyck?
Stanwyck, yes.
Stanwyck pouring the coffee on the man who's being a creep to her. And I have seen this so many times, and I've seen that clip. And I was like, finally, I get to see the full-fledged, like the context for this scene. And I am so happy we're talking about it. I'm so happy you asked me to watch this. Warner Brothers.
Yes.
1933.
Yes. Written by Daryl Zanuck,
Gene Markey, and Catherine Scola. Directed by Alfred E. Green.
Yes. So do you know the whole Zanuck history to that?
Oh, he was suing Warner Brothers, right?
He was getting out of Warner Brothers. He had to start his own studio.
He had to change his pen name and everything. Yeah.
And he sold it to Warner Brothers for $1 because he was making plenty of money. He felt bad. It's the Depression. Like, I don't want to make a ton of money. But Barbara had a very active role in the writing of this.
Wow. Do tell more.
Yeah. No, I'm sure you've got some stats. Throw me some stats. Well, what's the film about?
Well, okay.
It's a rags to riches.
Yes.
And you know what's odd is when you look at the description for Gilda and you look at the description, like, what is this movie about? They called Gilda a romance drama. I don't consider it a romance at all. And for Babyface, they also threw in the word romance. So do you think this is just a generic, like this just draw people in? But there's no romance in Babyface.
I mean, you might be able to argue it at the end, but I would still say it's so much more than that. I would say it's a story about survival, about a woman's tenacity to, make the most of it underneath the circumstances that she's given. Okay, so context for Babyface. Obviously, there's prohibition.
Yes.
Where, alcohol was not legal. So they're coming out of that and into the Great Depression. So people were really struggling, and it was a very hard time. And I think Babyface takes in a lot of films of that era, an unflinching look at what kind of the reality was and how desperate people, what they would do to get by and to make ends meet. So yes, the rise of the gangster films, the rise of, kind of women having to operate under these still sexist patriarchal standards. So then background for Babyface, there was an uncensored, the original version that was submitted because it was state censorship.
It was state censorship, right.
So
New York State.
The New York State Censorship Board, basically it went to them. They were offended. They couldn't believe what was in there. And they were like, absolutely not. Haze code, the production code. And they cut 4 minutes. Right. They actually changed the ending.
Yes. A few times. There's a few endings. There's at least 3 endings to this
Really?
movie. Yes.
I thought it was just the...
Yes. So continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until 2004 that the Library of Congress found the original version that had been submitted to the censorship board with those original 4 minutes of film that had been cut, which we will talk about those scenes later because I think it's very telling what was added and what was taken away. Also, shout out to Laura Dern. She did a beautiful intro to this for Turner Classic Movies for TCM, and her admiration of Barbara Stanwyck.
It's so emotional when you hear her speak about Barbara and just
because it
how
is
inspiring
like
she was to her. Yeah.
So Barbara Stanwyck, obviously Meet John Doe, Ball of Fire, Double Indemnity is another one. We see a lot of that clip of her walking with those little cat eye sunglasses.
Film noir.
Lady Eve, but also comedy. She could do so much.
Well,
and
Big Valley. Mm-hmm. It's one of my favorite TV shows as a kid. She was the only matriarch on television at the time.
Yeah. I just love her.
Yeah.
Because again, here's a woman who is so subtle in her acting. I really could probably watch her entire catalog, and that could be my acting school.
Right.
I didn't need UCLA. What? Just the dignity and the strength and the just brilliance. How transformative she is from character to character is just a thing of beauty to watch. And can I tell you the shot that I wanted to take?
Yes. Yes.
Or do we want to talk about what wasn't and was not included?
Well, first of all, the story, it's a rags to riches story, but it's literally about a woman sleeping her way to the top.
Yep.
Coming from just dire, horrific circumstances, childhood circumstances, where her father's literally pimping her out.
From the age of 14.
And her, having someone in her life, a cobbler guy in her life saying,
Crag,
you need to get out of here.
I have the quote. I wrote it down.
Yes, please.
Do you want to hear it?
Good. I do. But it was really, she had just her father is killed in an explosion. And she realizes, well, I'm just kind of stuck here. This is my life. I don't know what I'm going to do. But this is it. And the cobbler, what's his name? Craig says, no, you have options. You have choices.
Obviously, Nietzsche.
I don't know. Potato.
Nietzsche.
Is it?
I think so.
I always say Nietzsche, but I want to say that's not correct.
I think it's Nietzsche. Was a big part of this. So I'm going to give 2 quotes that he references in the film.
Okay.
The first one is when he's sitting down at the bar. I believe this is the bar scene, where he says, a woman, young, beautiful like you, can get anything she wants in the world because you have power over men. But you must use men, not let them use you. You must be a master, not a slave. Look here. Nietzsche says all life, no matter how we idealize it is nothing more nor less than exploitation. That's what I'm telling you. Exploit yourself. Go to some big city where you will find opportunities. Use men. Be strong. Defiant. Use men to get the things you want. And then later when she goes to him before she's about to leave, he quotes Nietzsche again and says, it's kind of her thing when she looks at the book and it shows you that one thing. It's face life as you find it, defiantly and unafraid. Waste no energy yearning for the moon. Crush out all sentiment.
Yes.
Which, now let's get into code.
Yes.
The code, production code that changed this.
And it's so interesting, the timing of this film, because it's 1933. The production code really officially came into play in 1934.
They say this movie was the catalyst.
Was the catalyst for, okay, we need to speed this up. Yeah. we can't wait. There are movies like this being made. And so the timing was really interesting and telling. And
you had the Legion of Decency.
Right.
So trying to get back to those traditional middle class Christian values. Right. They were really trying to amplify that message. And Nietzsche, the philosopher, obviously, was not big on Christianity.
No, he was an atheist.
Yes.
Nihilist?
Is that nihilist?
Nihilist?
I mean, he challenged a lot of, kind of Christian morals and ideals at that time.
Not to anything or anyone. It's all up to you.
Yes. Taking the power away from. So what changed? Can I get into what changed from... Oh, go ahead.
Just want to say pre-code literally is once sound became a reality. So that was 1928, 29 to 1934 is what they consider pre-code Hollywood.
Yes. Technically they had but they weren't really enforcing
They weren't, and like to your point, it was state by state.
Yeah.
It wasn't a...
And then this film came along
and rock the boat, baby.
Yeah. So basically they re-edited that entire what I just read.
Yes.
They completely re-edited that quote. So they cut out because you have power over men. They rearranged some things. They added be clean, be cleanly, because cleanliness is next to godliness.
Yes.
They rearranged it. So they completely edited that because it was at odds with Christian morality and men's, that women do not. That was quite a controversial take there. So they edited that out. And then they also, obviously, as we talked about before, the ending changed so that bad people get punished at the end. So they cut the doctor saying he has a good chance of living and surviving this. And instead, they added a scene to where there are bankers sitting around discussing, hey, whatever happened to that lady and her husband?
Exactly.
And they say, well, they lost every penny. They lost it all to the bank. We don't know what happened to her. She came full circle and now they're working at a steel mill in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
And then obviously there was no train scene, which blew my mind. When I saw this scene, I didn't know that was coming.
Is this in the beginning where she and Chico?
When they are stowaways.
They're stowaways, yeah.
And I knew about the film obviously but I did not know. I was so surprised because everyone, like I said, we idealize the past, right? The sexism of present day, we try to paint a picture of the past when that was not at all what was the reality. Even something as simple example as Audrey Hepburn, right? Everyone paints her as this, angelic, UNICEF, all this. She had a mouth like a sailor. Anyone who knew her talks about how she had a mouth like a sailor. And so I think a lot of times we like to erase that grit, or we like to idealize the past. And this was such a gritty scene. I could not. Basically, for those of you at home, if you haven't seen this scene, they are stowaways on a train. The kind of train yard, what do we call him? guy making sure they're in stowaways.
He's just checking all the
says, I'm kicking you out. I'm going to get you arrested. I'm going to throw you in prison. And she goes, well, I know something I could do that will change your mind.
Yeah, let's talk about this.
She kind of goes into the darkness. Again, the use of the lighting and the cinematography. And while she goes, light off, sings a beautiful song.
And the glove is laid down. And Chico walks to the other side of the compartment.
Dealing with real, real.
What you said about, Alicia Malone, who's one of the TCM hosts, she wrote an amazing book, Backwards and in Heels, which talks about Alice and like all those.
It's about Ginger Rogers, right? Because Fred Astaire is the famous quote.
Exactly. So if you haven't read Alicia's book, highly recommend it. It's fantastic. But she actually said, in regards to Babyface, she said, when I first started watching films, they weren't pre-code films. They were, the 40s, 50s, 60s. And you just kind of thought that's how people lived. Exactly as you mentioned. And then you watch pre-code and you realize, oh, no, this is some bubble and fantasy for the most part that Hollywood's, been feeding, which is fine and good and well and serves a purpose. But pre-code, the beauty of it is the complexities, the grit, those moments where you watch a movie and go, because that train scene, I don't care how many times I see that film, that scene, it changes her story, the trajectory of her life going forward. It's that, fork in the road kind of thing. She's now going down this road. But it's so devastating to watch. Woman in control, no question. But at the same time, it's just really difficult to watch.
You just aren't expecting it.
No, and there's nothing explicit about it.
No.
In the film, she has myriad encounters with men, sexual encounters, but you never see anything, which makes it even more powerful.
Again, the nuance.
Show,
don't tell, which takes me to kind of just insert my favorite shot of this film.
Oh, there's so many. What's your favorite?
Which embodies this, is when she is at the speakeasy that her father runs, and she opens the window.
She's standing there.
That clear backdrop, right? It's supposed to be Erie, Pennsylvania. It's an industrial town.
Steel mills. Yep.
And all she does is blow the soot off the flowers that are sitting there in the flower bed. While she's trying to avoid the advances of the bar patron.
Trying to find some beauty in the moment.
And it was just you told so much story in that one shot. I didn't even need the backdrop of the steel mills, really, right? So she's sitting there trying to evade these advances of this guy. She opens a window. She looks at the flowers. She blows the ash and soot off the flowers. And that one little moment told so much story about what was going on at the time. And art reflects the current, that's what it should be, right? Is that it's reflecting kind of the current culture and what is happening. So yes, post World War II, they're painting a certain kind of picture, whereas in the Great Depression, it's a very different reality of what it is to get by and what home life is like. And I really thought that shot encapsulated for me so much about that movie in 5 seconds, that shot. So for me, that was mine. What about yours?
One shot.
Or just the one that you think of that stands out to you the most?
I think there were it goes back, it's interesting, but it does go back to the speakeasy scene. And it's that moment, it's not the coffee, but it's that moment where she just wants to be left alone. Dad's, gotten money for this guy to have his way with his daughter, but he puts his hand on her leg. And it's just that she looks up. And it's so still and so centered. and so powerful. You know, there's so much energy inside of her that she could explode at any moment, but she doesn't.
I love it.
It's just, and that's what Stanwyck did best. Truly.
It's just strength and power with everything in just a look. So again, the show don't tell, right? And how brilliantly written these films really were. We don't need the exposition. We don't need all that. You can say so much in a look. You can say, in the restraint is a response. Like that's telling you everything about the character in that moment. Because it takes strength not to react. It takes strength not to engage.
Which is so key to everything that's going on now.
Oh, yeah.
I find these films supporting and encouraging restraint and not viewing restraint as a weakness or as a passive point of view.
I mean, what is it? The biggest gaslighting grift of the patriarchy is that we've somehow convinced people that anger is not an emotion. And you know my background, I studied martial arts for a long time, and Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune Do, and Bruce Lee was very much about not having those moments of being quick to anger. That actually shows a lack of control. That shows a lack of control of your faculties. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, and this isn't her issue, it's everyone.
Yes.
But it takes more strength to not be quick to anger, to not stoop to someone's level, to not, you know, and I think this movie is a beautiful, in an interesting way. Oh gosh, there's so much I want to talk to you about that I can't. But of a woman having to operate under the patriarchal standards of which, and it also reflects kind of the realities of the workforce at that time, where women were trying to get work and trying to get by, and unfortunately were exploited a lot of times in order for better pay or for better. It's not about her being a slut or a whore. It's about the patriarchal system that was in place that made it so that she had to go to those levels in order to gain more and to have that kind of upward mobility.
I found it funny, though, that even when she moved into the corporate world, the cattiness of other women who clearly saw what she was doing. And did you pick up on maybe they were just a little jealous? They were busy poo-pooing her.
Again, this is something I think women throughout the ages can reflect on. There's a lot of internalized misogyny that occurs, a lot of excuses that are made for men's behavior, and women oftentimes, and not just women, but other, you know, people of color, whatever, are oftentimes demonized for the actions of powerful, rich, white men. So I think women sometimes, you'll find, and I was actually shocked by this with recent events, of how many women kind of saddle up to that dynamic in order to reap the benefits of it. And here you have Babyface, a movie where she literally is like, okay, well, this is it. This is the system I'm working under and operating under. Well, I'm going to exploit it to my advantage. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy to, on the other side, you know, judge and reprimand and say, well, this is wrong and you're lacking moral, you know, a moral backbone or a moral compass. But it really does create a lot of dialogue, I think, behind how do women operate underneath patriarchy? Do you take advantage, saddle up to it, and reap the benefits? Do you challenge it? Do you speak out against it?
Right.
Or do you not stick your neck out at all and just keep the status quo and stay safe? I've run into this in my own work where I'm not someone who I was a bartender. I'm from Boston. Can I swear?
Yes, you can.
I don't bullshit. and I don't tolerate disrespect. So I've run into it where I've seen other women deal with disrespect in the workplace by laughing it off and, oh, ha, 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 and oh, you're so, and I'm in on the joke and it's all good, and not shaking the boat, right? And keeping that boat steady. And I know I've probably run into, because I call it out and I draw the boundary and I say, hey, I'm not going to tolerate that. So then I'm probably the challenging one, or the one who's, and the more women I think speak out and say, like, what happened with Katherine Heigl, that women creating boundaries and saying that I won't tolerate certain disrespect and certain things, there's a blowback that comes with it. There's something, you do have some repercussions.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying there's a wrong way. I'm not judging a woman for wanting to not kind of incur that wrath or that fire, but I know what works for me. And I'm just someone who, being raised in an environment where my voice mattered and my voice held as equal weight and respect as coming from a man, that I'm going to butt up against those systems sometimes. But I think it's better to get it out in the open and say it versus letting it fester and eat away at my spirit and my own,
integrity.
Yeah. And also I think, if you study, I don't know, let's say authoritarianism, these positions come into power because people aren't speaking up and because people are afraid to use their voice. So if I can navigate,
afraid, don't know how.
I mean, a female politician was just assassinated. So being a woman in the spotlight and using your voice and using a platform has consequences. And again, consequences for everyone. But women, even like I'm sure on social media, you see just the microcosm of the response and blowback that women get from having a voice and saying something online versus, other people. It can be a lot and it's very scary, but I don't know. I've personally, these women who I look to, Katharine Hepburn, the Mae West, the Barbara Stanwicks of the world, Joan Crawford, Betty Davis. Oh my gosh, when you hear Betty Davis in an interview, the way and I'm like,
yes, indeed.
She wasn't canceled? But that fearlessness and that strength is something that really inspires me in my own life and how I operate in this industry. And what I want women to take with them is that it wasn't just some, this isn't some new thing. Women.
Well, that's the beauty. This is why we do these podcasts about classic film. It's not just a bunch of old movies. It's a reflection of what was going on at the time. And guess what? Not a whole lot has changed.
Yeah. It's how, who are the history tellers? Like
who are the history tellers? Who are the podcast folks sharing this history?
I will say it's very interesting when you look at like the top podcasts. It's very obvious there are two very different worlds kind of coexisting right now. So I do think it is, and I didn't mean for this to turn into this little soapbox moment here, but these two films I think are exemplary of a woman's strength and tenacity under difficult circumstances of, kind of the patriarchal boot on the neck.
Absolutely. And the depiction of men in both of the films is just as important as the depiction of women, because the men are made out to look foolish and egotistical and narcissistic. It's fascinating, just the different mirrors.
It is. I always, and again, don't put the blame on me, how revelatory that scene is of her singing this song, saying, oh, well, she caused the earthquake. She caused the tidal wave. She caused the, because so often in TV and film, men are not often held accountable for their actions. And I think that is something that unfortunately, is something that still to this day is an issue in the depiction of, so many different kind of storylines that, I should probably stop talking.
No. This is why I love what I do, because having conversations is everything.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with someone or don't agree with someone, we're all human. If we have the ability to sit down with some restraint when all the emotions are so high, and we can't just say right now, they've always been high. Everything that's going on right now is not new. Mm-hmm. You can look through history and see what's going on having been repeated throughout history.
Yeah.
But just having the ability to have a conversation with somebody, to spend time in something that you do love so that you can get recharged and inspired to be able, then go back out into the world and, maybe just face it with your chin's a little bit up, your shoulders are down, and you speak your truth.
And also this is why representation matters. And I think that's really
always
why I think these films are so revelatory for me, is in how they depict women as multifaceted and having such depth. And again, the erasure of women's contributions to film and cinema, it's obviously not just them that have dealt with this, like people of color, their contributions.
Absolutely.
Chico, obviously, is a very...
Teresa Harris. And I really want to give, say her name.
Yeah.
Because the relationship between her and Lily Powers, we didn't even say Barbara Stanwyck's character's name. Mm-hmm. Lily Powers. Mm-hmm. Therein lies the rub. Yeah. So, that relationship between an African-American woman and a white woman at that time was part of the problem, the censorship problem. Mm-hmm. You just didn't depict that kind of friendship between these two races and classes and that sort of thing. So kudos to that and representation.
Yes, and why it is so important to have people in these rooms that are making decisions and how we tell story about how either gender or different cultures are represented. I do think sometimes like you just need to have that moment of like, oh yeah, this is problematic. Like this one, or, and still, cause we're still fighting those fights today where there's something that to me is so like, how do you not get that this is okay? Like very tone deaf. All right. Let's have someone else's perspective in the room. Maybe let's get both sides represented here instead of just the viewpoint. Because so often we talk about the male gaze and how often women are portrayed through the male gaze and how and again, that shot of her in the bar when he's literally panning up her,
yes,
from heel all the way up as she's sitting there to show the objectification of women, like,
and to show that was a reality.
Yeah. I mean,
you can say, oh, well, it was the camera doing that. No, that's how men look at women. Mm-hmm. That's what it feels like.
But it's also important to know that if the people, like, if a production is making choices to film a woman in certain ways, whether it's intended in the dialogue or not, like the Bechdel test is there for a reason, which if you don't know what that is, just look it up. But it is very important to understand how it does contribute in some ways to the objectification of women or how they are portrayed. And that's why I love these films so much. It's because I think women were more in the room, in the decision-making process, in the writing process, also directors as well, which oftentimes back then they were directing and the cinematographer. They were doing both at the same time. And again, not the majority, but still sadly more than what we have today. And that's why there are so many rich, nuanced female characters. I keep saying nuanced. Yeah. Complex.
And that's life.
Yeah.
That's human. Humans are nuanced and complex. And to be able to see that in film, it's just gold.
It matters.
It does matter.
I again, when I saw these films for the first time, my jaw dropped. for some of the, like Mae West, for example. And I'm sitting there going, like, did they talk like that back then? Like I said, even seeing a Betty Davis interview where I'm going, I thought they had decorum and that there were politeness and being, you know, so sweet and genteel. And no, honey, spitfires.
Yeah.
Meaning just as powerful, just as strong. And so I think that's why I was just so overjoyed when you recommended Babyface. I think
was
it's
just so
such
happy
a great
that you said yes to this
accompaniment.
because I figured it'd be so much fun. So let's raise a toast to Gilda and Babyface.
Lily Powers.
Lily Powers.
Yes, to Gilda and Lily Powers.
Nuance.
May I walk with the same brave fieriness and what was it? Hold on. I want to find that Nietzsche quote. What is it? I got it. Face life as you find it, defiantly and unafraid. Waste no energy yearning for the moon. Crush out all sentiment. Well, maybe a little sentiment.
Maybe a little sentimentality.
Yeah, maybe a little. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. You're welcome anytime. Thank you. Until we meet again.